We seem to be at the next great gate of history. By that, I mean it seems like a civil war is bumbling under the surface. Justin, expand.
What I think you're seeing right now in America is you're seeing, I don't want to say battle lines, but you're seeing an ideological division of the mind that's occurring. One of them is of, let's say, compliance and belief in centralized authority. One is, distrust, belief in the individual, and should we say like self-sovereignty. And what's unfortunate about, I think, all of this is that to actually move forward, you need a bit of a balance of each, but that is far from where we are at today.
Jeff,
What
if I can intervene there for 1 second, I don't think the majority of people think that they are actually believing in that centralized view and they are thinking that they are just submitting to authority. I think that they just believe that what the media is telling them is ethically right and they want to push that on other people and themselves. They're willingly, not because they think that they are submitting to authority. They just think that this is ethically right for themselves.
I would completely agree with that front, Josh. So let me see if I can say that slightly differently. It's basically the NPC problem set a slightly different way, as our friend Bismuth would say. These people have been completely demoralized. And look, just to be clear, sometimes you do need a centralized authority, or a centralized authority can actually be useful in some things, whatever, right? But there are also some situations where you do not want a centralized authority, and it cannot be the go-to answer for everything. And so the problem is that when you have morality of what I assume to be, I should say, the morality of these people, it's actually the morality of compliance. It's slave morality versus, okay, well, what is the actual end result of the compliance? Think back to, the mask mandates back in the day or whatever, right? Where you had people essentially virtue signaling, I would argue, for a large part of this, when you actually looked at the underlying results and said, well, wait a minute, this might not be helping, this might not be achieving the end that we want. But either way, there was a post that I read from a different website, which I probably shouldn't mention, and I had a really interesting take on that. And the key takeaway was this, is that what you're seeing right now is we have seen the polarization of the mind. Okay, so we have seen that. So think like red state versus blue state. But what's interesting is you're seeing the next level of it, where you see people who, let's say, have a more independent mindset leaving the blue state havens. So think like, people moving out of California, for example. And likewise, you see people who have more of a compliance / NPC / centralization mindset moving towards the blue states. The interesting thing, and perhaps the dangerous thing about this, is that, number one, rather than people becoming like, Josh, you want exposure to other viewpoints. Like you want this like social intercourse and this dialogue to continue, because I really think that, when one person's pulling this way, the other person's pulling another way, whatever, right? The tension lets people find the middle. But when you go into an echo chamber, and you saw this kind of like, think back to Twitter, Facebook, or, social media, whatever, right? Or you just go back to, Metal Gear Solid 2 with the AI speech or whatever, right? People retreat into their own private, echo chambers, afraid of a larger truth. So it's one thing if it happens in social media, whatever, right? You basically get, the hellscape that's known as Twitter, but it's a much larger problem when it actually starts happening in the real world, as I think it is happening in the real world, when people are basically self-segregating themselves into ideological viewpoints, because what that means is that you're going to have a strong concentration of the ideology on this regard, and that's without, let's say, a corresponding counterbalance to it, and that's problematic. So in any event, what I find that's particularly interesting about this is, again, just as you have the battle lines being drawn in the mind, you're now seeing, and I hate to use the word, but the lines of demarcation now also are being drawn on a geographical, front as well. Mainly you have the coast, the blue, like large metro cities or whatever, right? And some parts in the heartland too, thinking one way. And you have, let's say, rural America and the deep red states thinking a slightly different way. Now, if shit actually does hit the fan, it's going to be particularly interesting, because I will simply note that you can have whatever beautiful dreams you want. You can, think back to Chaz, from Seattle, or let's say San Francisco. I'll pick on them, I have family over there. But let's just say San Francisco says, okay, listen, this is utterly ridiculous. We believe in, complete equality. We believe in equality of outcome, blah, 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 whatever. Okay, great. They can put all these things through. But at the end of the day, where do you think your food's coming from? Where do you think your energy's coming from? Where do you think your clean water's coming from? And if you think that, if your entire goal or your entire moral objective for life is to simply not feel bad, or to show others how good you are by signaling how good you are, look at how well we're working out for Europe. Josh, earlier today I noted an article saying that Germany was having to reactivate their coal power plants. I think one of the best ways I've seen this framed is, again, Friedman talking about the storm before the calm, where he mentions that the current crisis that we next have to face, for the next institutional crisis, the 80-year cycle, is the relationship of the federal government to itself. And if you think about the last crisis, you had experts that were brought in to fix World War II, the Depression, and arguably lead us through the Cold War. The centralization, the three-letter agencies, whatever, right? They actually did a decent job when they got started, but since then they've lost the plot. Thus, the relationship of the federal government needs to be redefined. The problem is when you have people who are essentially compliance monsters or sucked up of the compliance monster, it's a very alien thought where it's so intertwined, I think, with the personality that it's like a moral imperative. Like they will lose a part of themselves if they actually have to think the thought of, wait a minute, what if the government's actually not being honest? What if the government's actually not being true or whatever, right? Or what if the experts lied to me? There we go. You have people who hold expertise as almost like a religion, and the people who hold expertise to this religious, fervor, these are also people who disdain religion and think they themselves are not religious, which is whatever. It's hilarious to watch. Embarrassing, but hilarious to watch at the same time. So I think this is kind of to your point here. You're seeing these tensions, creak and groan. And as far as, the Civil War thing in America, hopefully it doesn't come to that. But I think you're starting to see you're starting to see like the population from a geographical standpoint mimic the beliefs of what they feel in the mind. And if you look at social media as kind of like a early warning system of this, I don't think it's been good there, because again, you create these echo chambers, and it's one thing if it's online, but I think it's quite something else if this starts happening in the real world of geography or whatever. I mean, hopefully it doesn't get bad, or hopefully it gets just bad enough to wake people up so they can have their come to Jesus moment, but not too far gone where you have to start saying, the Owl of Minerva only takes flight at dusk or whatever, right?
Kind of what Justin was alluding to earlier, where people are living in their own echo chambers and people are now moving to the places where everybody thinks like them. If you're on, it doesn't matter which way you think. Everything that you see online is going to delegate similar things to the way that you believe, because all social medias are just correlated to make you want to stay on the app, and they're going to suggest videos or post or media that you want to see. So if you are far on the right, they're going to show you things that are far on the right. If you're far on the left, it'll be the complete opposite, or they'll try and bait you in with some of the other stuff to give you engagement. But it is strictly all we're seeing today is just confirming our biases, and now people are starting to take that to the next level, and they're actually moving to where they want to be. This causes divergence because people need to be aware of contrarian thought, and we are not in a situation where we can actually see that. So when you only have one belief system and your entire identity is tied to that, and everyone around you's identity is tied to that, you see a Ukraine flag, you say go Ukraine, Russia bad, and you guys all start marching together, that causes tension. And with the economic system collapsing kind of like it is right now, that's going to make people kind of just go loose, and they are going to have to exacerbate the rage that they're feeling, which I think definitely could come in a civil war. I don't know if it'll be a red versus blue, or just kind of like we saw in March of 2020, where we had guerrilla warfare kind of in the streets where everyone was just protesting for different reasons, just causing violence and mayhem.
By the way, like I said, hopefully, like I said, it does get better. But I do think, as someone once said, and someone who actually just recently reappeared in recent times, that only at the edge will people find the will to change.